Welcome back to Doc Jones Garage, everybody. Now that the carburetor's behind us, let's turn our attention to this air filter housing. This Airbox has definitely seen better days, so in this episode we're going to transform it from that into that. Well, yeah, I know this is not something that you normally see people rebuild. In fact, normally you see people taking these off their bikes, but we're keeping this one on our bike. So thanks again for joining me, and let's get started. Alright, episode 6, the air filter assembly. So let's get this thing disassembled so that we can start cleaning it up. It's just covered in grease and dust. We're going to get that all cleaned off there. It's an actual Honda air filter. Maybe it's the original air filter. Really dirty on the inside. We're going to have to get all this stuff cleaned up. I mainly use simple green, and also I had a pail of hot water with dish soap. As bad as they looked, none of the fasteners were really very difficult to get off. The long bolts that hold the two halves of that part of the housing together, I did spray some penetrating oil on the nuts just to make sure that I didn't damage the housing when I was taking them apart. The rubber in between the housing and those brackets there it's pretty sticky, and all of these hose clamps are pretty rough looking, but they've got a date with the Vapour Blaster. Those turn out so nice you won't even recognize them. Their general condition was pretty good, so I really wanted to make sure to try and save them. To get the other side off here, that's a retaining clip for a cable, and it's pretty corroded too, so we're going to clean that up. So here we've got the dividing section of the upper part of the housing off, and now we get a better look at the velocity stacks and get those removed. The rubber in between that bracket and the upper part of the housing was pretty stuck on there, but we'll get those taken care of. So little sleeves just to make sure that you can't tighten up those two halves too much and wreck the plastic. It's like a little spacer with shoulders. The larger shoulder goes through the top of the upper part of the airbox. So here we'll see a little bit of Vapour Blasting. I think mainly what you see here is me cleaning. There's some rivets that go through the breather on the top of the housing there that were rusty, and I was thinking that I was going to have to drill them out in order to replace them. I was going to maybe replace them with some stainless steel ones, but of course then it occurred to me that I could Vapour Blast them and not worry about damaging the housing. Here we're going to be cleaning up the clamps for the velocity stacks and get all the paint off them. The brackets that hold the airbox to the bike frame came out really nice, and the rivets came out perfect. I'm going to go in with a small brush and paint those before I mount that on the bike. So here we're going to get rid of all of the grease and dust that's built up on there and just do a little inspection on the upper part of the airbox. I noticed there seemed to be a few scratches, and you'll see here after I clean it and get a better look at it, there's actually some pretty deep gouges on there. I'm not sure, it looks like it's from a screwdriver or something. Maybe somebody was having a hard time getting it apart at one time. So as you can imagine, there's quite a bit of dust and little bits of grease built up around that seal. So I'm going to get that into that hot soapy water and just scrub all that stuff out of there as best I can. And then it'll really show me the spots that I need to go back and hit again with the simple green. Make everything minty fresh. Here's a good shot of just how much dirt is built up around the end of the velocity stacks there, so we'll give those the same treatment. Get them in the hot water, clean them up. Now that is an example of what I want the other ones to look like. So I gave that a good cleaning, some simple green, made sure all the greasy dirt was out of there, just like I just did with those ones. And here we have some Armor All. This is just their classic Armor All protectant, and I will throw a link up there to the video where I saw somebody doing that, and it actually seems like it worked pretty good. So I'm using a little bit of wet and dry to try to take some of the scratches out of the top of that housing. And there's a few spots. The velocity stacks turned out really nicely. I've only got one more in the Armor All there left to do. You can see there's it's still a little bit hazy there, but the cover definitely is looking a lot better. I got a little bit more work to do. Inside's nice and clean now. Just generally looking really good. There was some pretty good scratches on the bottom there too that I had to get rid of. There's still a few around the edge there. I'm going to give it some more going over with the wet and dry. And then we'll polish it up. Just kind of doing a little bit of a test fit here, make sure the seal's going everywhere where it needs to. Everything seemed to fit together pretty good. There was a little bit of distortion in the housing, but once you get that divider in there, it fixes it right up. It's going to go together nicely. So kind of get a little bit of a preview of what it's going to look like. Feels like we're in the home stretch now. So here's where it's going to get exciting. So I did a little bit of research about nickel plating, like DIY nickel plating, and this is my first go at it, but I mean there's even just in this one simple part there's just a ton of fasteners, so those already kind of given them a little bit of a cleanup and a wire brush treatment. A lot of this stuff has just been vapor blasted. After really thinking about what I wanted to do with some of those rusty bolts on the carburetor, I started looking into plating and realized I had a lot of the stuff that I needed to do it. So I ordered some nickel, and I'll throw a link up to the main video that really gave me most of the information that I needed to even try this. And I'm sure I'm making all kinds of mistakes, but I think the results were pretty good. And generally the whole process seems pretty simple. I know there's probably quite a few things that I can do in order to improve. First off, we're using white vinegar as the base for the solution. And for the amount that I have there, you want to have about a tablespoon of salt in there just to make the solution a little bit more conductive. And what I'm going to be doing is clamping a cathode and an anode on the inside there and passing a current through. And basically what it's doing is it's suspending at least some form of nickel, I think it's like nickel sulfate or sulfide or something, into the solution and preparing it so that we can use it to plate some nickel. So like I said, I'm going to provide a link to the video that I got, what I felt was the best information for a DIYer. And then I really liked how this turned out, actually. I like this process, and I'm going to refine it a little bit more. So I'm going to make another video explaining what I'm doing here a little bit better. And I'm going to add my improvements to it, or some of the things that I've found in order to either make the process easier to do or get better results. So those are the bolts from the clamps for the velocity stacks. I've cleaned them up, and there you see that they're actually plated there. You can tell when they're nickel plated, they get like just a slight different color to them. The main thing you want to keep in mind if you're going to try DIY plating, and everybody says this, so I'll say it also, is that you only get the kind of finish out of it that you put into it. So it has to look pretty good to begin with in order for you to have a nice result. And even then there's still a little bit of work that you have to do. But you can see there, I mean, the one side needs to be cleaned up a little bit more on the right there, but the other side's been plated. As you can see here, all those bubbles forming on the outside of the part are hydrogen. So make sure you do any of this in a well ventilated area. So I'm just slowly working my way through all the fasteners, plating everything, and I was quite happy with the result. So now it's time for reassembly. So I'm fairly confident I finally managed to get all the grease and grime out of that seal. There did seem like there was some kind of adhesive originally holding that seal on. I haven't put anything in there yet. Start off by putting these velocity stacks back where they belong, making sure that we got the right side facing up. There's a small flat part of the seal that goes into the housing. The flat goes to the bottom. To make sure that we put some anti-seize on all of our fasteners. So we can definitely see the light at the end of the tunnel now. I'm using the inner bolts to kind of try to get all those plates and rubber gaskets and everything positioned properly. I didn't want to do them up too tightly. And then reinstall those spacers, making sure the larger shoulder is pointing towards the top of the housing. Get them all lined up with the divider and the seal and everything in place all at once, and get the nuts back in place. This is what actually holds those two pieces together, and even though we have those spaces in there, you want to make sure they're not too tight. So now we'll be putting those pesky nuts back on the bottom that gave us so much trouble back in episode 2. That's the reason why we had such a hard time getting that housing apart. Let's get the last little bit of anti-seize on those bolts that hold the airbox to the bike frame, and we'll get the velocity stack clamps back in place. We gave them a fresh coat of paint and freshly plated bolts, and they're looking sharp. So here we have it. Reassembly of the airbox is done. What a difference. I slapped the carburetor on there just to see what it would look like. Can't wait to see all this bolted back on the bike. Hey, look at that, you made it to the end of the video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video or if it helped you at all, why not give it a like? Here's a link to my CB750 playlist. If you want to keep up to date with all the stuff going on in Doc Jones' garage, you know what to do.